Hey, it's Brandon from BrandonToksMovies here at HorrorFest International. I'm here with Laura Patterson and Adria Zimmer from Silent Generation. First off, thank you both for bringing this film to HorrorFest. Everyone loved it. We loved it. So tell us, Laura, you are the writer and producer for this. Tell us about where you came up with this idea and a little bit some of the background behind this film.
So this is based on a true story, and it was really sort of an extrapolation of an event that happened to my grandparents. And what really stood out to me, I was at the time living in Florida. My grandparents were up in Ohio, and so there was a lot of distance between us, and I would call, and we'd try to stay in touch. But my grandmother injured herself like this, and the way the real story went, my grandpa was living with her at the time, and so she wanted to just cut off the injured part of her finger and go about her day. And my grandpa, understood that was a totally crazy thing to do, and swooped in and took her to the doctor. But it stood out as just a really horrific moment in my life because it highlighted for me the detachment that my grandparents were starting to experience from the rest of society, and how just with old age, I think, comes this distance, really, and disconnect that probably both the aging person and also certainly the people who are not aging don't necessarily see coming. And so it was really a sort of shocking, rude awakening to me that just how far they had drifted, or at least she had drifted from what seemed like normal, I guess. Mm-hmm. So that was, when I wanted to make a horror film, I really wanted to highlight some real world horror and something that I thought would resonate with audiences and hopefully encourage people really to call their grandparents, to be more, to be more connected to the elderly in our society, and to realize that they're in some ways slipping away without us noticing, which is a little bit where the Silent Generation title came from, not only, highlighting that generation and the name for that generation now, but also silence in terms of them not communicating with the rest of society, sort of the younger society being disconnected from our older counterparts.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about, I guess, so to kind of back up the synopsis of this film is about this older gentleman, this older man who's living alone. He's still able to get through most of his day, able to do some of these things, but he ends up kind of running into an accident. I was surprised to learn that this was a acting debut from this man. Tell us a little bit about your lead actor in this film and a little bit of his background.
Yeah, thank you. So Leo, our lead actor, I thought was fantastic in the film. And you're right, had never acted a day in his life. He was a lawyer. He's actually the father of someone I do a horror podcast with. And he's been very supportive about our podcast over the years. When it came time that we wanted to do this film, he initially had jumped in and said, he'd be willing to play our actor, and we shot the film in his house. It took a very long time to get from, inception of the idea stage to actually producing the film. And by the time it came time to do the film, he had experienced a lot of health challenges. He had a cancer diagnosis. He had a heart issue. And so my expectation was that he would no longer be interested in acting, that this would be a little bit too close to home. His wife has very serious dementia. So they were just struggling health-wise in a lot of ways. And when I brought up the idea kind of casually to my friend, Marshall, who I did the podcast with, like, your dad's probably not interested, right? And he spoke to his dad, and his dad said absolutely he was interested. And what really struck me in that moment was sort of on the theme of the short itself, that I had thought, oh, he's not going to want to do this because he's not going to want to think about those things. That's going to be too horrible for him to think about. Mm-hmm. But his whole life was now thinking about those things. Like we as people disconnected from that stage of life are able to think like, oh, just turn away. But he couldn't turn away. And I think he said, he would really like to be involved in getting this message out there and talking about, how to share the struggles of the older generation.
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of my grandparents, kind of that, especially my maternal grandfather, who's just very similar, kind of like, oh, got hurt, keep going, I guess. Like, what am I going to complain about? At least I'm not in the war, So, but I loved his performance. Very quiet, haunting and quiet and very sad performance. And to be able to communicate all that without any dialogue, especially as in an acting debut, I thought was very fantastic. Not trying to do this without spoiling anything. There's a very cool effect that's done in this where we get to see a little bit of a severed body part. Adria, why don't you tell us about you worked on the effects on this film. Tell us about making that happen, putting that together.
Putting the effects together was really fun. So Laura and I collaborated on that, and she got some materials that were really she researched them, and so we used some wax and some paint, and got together on a couple different occasions to practice working on the effects and the prosthesis, and there was moments where we both got a little grossed out by it. So as a first timer, I definitely felt a little squeamish at times. But
Can I ask what you used for the string?
so that's a great question. When we were looking at a realistic injury, we started by looking at a turkey leg, which has all sorts of tendons in it. And as we kind of got through that material, what we realized is that it actually looks a lot like wide dental floss. And that ended up being a really great substitute in the end, and really easy to get your hands on.
That's very cool. As an effects junkie myself, I really enjoyed your work there. Tell us about where this is going next, what this is doing. Are you taking this to other festivals? Is this part of something larger? What's the future for this short?
So we've submitted to a bunch of other festivals, so we hope to be taking it to other festivals, yeah. And this short is, excuse me, it's a shortcut from a larger screenplay. And so I've talked to the production team about possibly, thinking about in the future trying to actually produce the whole screenplay, which would be a much larger undertaking, but would be very, very, very cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both for bringing the film. As I said, we all enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. A very quiet, contemplative moment in a lot of really terrifying films. So thank you once again. And yes, from HorrorFest International, stay tuned for more from HorrorFest International.